When I walk into a room, the first thing I look for is where I can hide. And no, I don't mean a physical hiding spot. I'm talking about the kind of hiding only someone who lives with constant shame understands. The joke. For years, my biggest mask was humor. I laughed loudly, made jokes about myself, dropped those sarcastic lines that made everyone else feel comfortable. Everyone but me. "Hey, watch the chair. Hope it can handle the weight," I'd say before anyone else could. I turned myself into my own clown. And over time, I forgot who I was when I wasn't performing. My name is Michael Thompson. I'm 42 years old, and for more than half my life, I weighed over 570 pounds. Yes, you read that right. It didn't happen overnight. It was like sand slipping through your fingers, barely noticeable at first, but impossible to ignore once the pile had formed. I was the guy who ate to celebrate, ate to forget, ate to punish himself. Eating became my way of existing. I remember the day everything really began to fall apart. I worked as an IT technician in a public school in Indiana. I was good at my job even though my weight limited me physically. One day I walked into a classroom to fix a projector and I couldn't fit between the rows of desks. I tried to squeeze by, tripped, and crashed onto a table. It was humiliating. The students laughed, the teachers laughed. And me? I laughed. Too, a forced, loud, desperate laugh. I got up like nothing had happened, but inside, I was crushed. That night, I ate 3 large pizzas by myself. Not because I was hungry, because I was hurting. People think depression is just sadness, but it's not. Depression is silence, it's isolation. It's you in a dark room, phone in hand, ignoring calls, ignoring your own life. And even when someone notices and asks, "Are you okay?" the answer is always the same. "Of course, I'm fine." The lie becomes routine. I became an expert at smiling with dead eyes. My marriage started crumbling slowly. Amanda, my ex-wife, was always patient. In the beginning, she laughed at my jokes, thought I was funny. But over time, her laugh lost its spark. Her eyes lost their warmth. She said she felt alone even when I was right next to her, and she was right. I was there, physically, but my mind was in a dark place, as heavy as my body. She tried to help me, she begged me to seek support, but I was ashamed. I was the man of the house. How could I admit that I couldn't even get out of bed because the thought of facing the world terrified me? How could I tell her that I was afraid of myself? So instead of asking for help, I shut down even more. I lost my job a few months later. They said it was due to restructuring, but I knew the truth. I missed too many days, missed deadlines, showed up late because I couldn't even get out of my car when it rained. I had become invisible, even to my co-workers. And maybe the worst part is that I understood. I didn't want to deal with me. Why would they? When Amanda packed her bags and left with our 8-year-old daughter, there was no yelling, no fight, just a painful silence, like the kind that fills a house. When the laughter disappears, she said, "Michael, I just can't do this anymore. You've been gone for a long time." I sat on the couch, motionless, sweaty palms resting on my knees, a slice of cake on the coffee table in front of me. She walked out, and I just stayed there for hours, staring at the nothingness. That was the moment I realized I didn't exist anymore. Not to them, not to the world, and not to myself. In the days that followed, I kept eating. It was like every bite was anesthesia, but it never worked. Nothing filled that emptiness. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. My clothes didn't fit. My face was bloated, eyes sunken, skin pale. I was slowly giving up on myself without even realizing it. But then there was one day, one specific day. And that's when something inside me shifted. And I'll tell you all about that day in the next part, if you want to hear it, because that was the day I said, enough. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This simple gesture means a lot to our work and encourages us to keep sharing real, deep, and human stories. Stories that offer comfort, spark reflection, and remind us that no one is truly alone. Thank you so much for being here. Your presence matters. Always. I woke up that morning with the same weight on my chest, not just physical but emotional. My back ached, my knees screamed, and even breathing felt like work. But something was different. I couldn't quite explain it at first. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the fact that I had gone almost 3 days without speaking to a single person. Not a text, not a phone call, not a knock on the door. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. My face was puffed, my eyes hollow, and my shoulders slumped like they carried every regret I'd ever collected. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the sink, and whispered something I hadn't said in years. I don't want to live like this anymore. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real. It was the first honest thing I'd said to myself in a very long time. I stood there for what felt like hours, just breathing, until the bathroom mirror fogged up with the weight of my own realization. That same afternoon I waddled to the nearest community center. Every step hurt. My heart pounded. Not from the physical strain, but from the fear. I wasn't just stepping out of my apartment, I was stepping out of my silence. Inside the building, I stood in the hallway for 10 full minutes before approaching the front desk. A young woman smiled at me. Her name was Carla. She looked like she couldn't be more than 25. I kept thinking, she's going to laugh. She's going to look at me with pity. She's going to think I'm a joke. But instead, she said the words I never expected. "How can I help you today?" And that broke me. Right there in that hallway, a grown man, over 570 pounds, started crying like a child. I couldn't even speak. I just sobbed. Carla didn't flinch. She walked around the desk, put her hand gently on my shoulder, and let me cry. That was the beginning. I started attending support meetings for emotional eaters. At first, I sat in the back, never spoke, just listened. But the stories, they were mine. Different names, different faces, but the same pain. People who had been laughed at, ignored, abandoned. People who had buried their trauma under layers of food and shame. I met a man named Richard, 62 years old, who had lost 200 pounds over 3 years. He became my mentor, though. He never called himself that. We'd meet every Tuesday, sit outside with bottled water and talk. No pressure, no lectures. Just two broken people trying to be whole again, but not everything changed at once. The weight didn't fall off like magic. The depression didn't lift after one meeting. I still had days when I couldn't get out of bed, nights when I stared at the ceiling for hours, mornings when I wanted to quit. And food was still there, always there, calling to me like an old friend. But I started seeing it differently. I began therapy with a woman named Dr. Lisa Carter. She wasn't like the other therapists I had tried before. She didn't ask me to count calories. She asked me to count memories, to talk about the first time I felt invisible, to talk about my father's silence, my mother's judgment, the bullies in middle school, the coaches who laughed when I ran, the girl who pretended to like me for a dare. It was like opening a wound that never healed, but for the first time, I wasn't doing it alone. I still remember the first time I told someone, I have depression. It wasn't in a whisper, it wasn't hidden inside a joke. I said it plainly. I didn't cry, I didn't laugh, I just said it. And they said, thank you for trusting me. I wasn't used to kindness, I wasn't used to being seen. Around that time, I made a decision. I was going to try, not for Amanda, not for my daughter, not even for my old job or the people who had given up on me, for me. I started walking short distances every morning, just 10 steps at first, then 20, then around the block. People stared, kids pointed, but I kept walking, because even if the world hadn't changed, I had. I was no longer hiding behind jokes. I was facing the pain, step by painful step, and somewhere in those slow, breathless walks, something beautiful happened. I started to believe I was worthy of change, not because I was losing weight, not because people were suddenly clapping for me, but because I finally stopped waiting for someone else to save me. I had decided to save myself. Progress is quiet. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It sneaks in the smallest of moments, like realizing you walked an extra block without stopping, or when someone calls you by name instead of just nodding awkwardly. After a few months, I had lost around 60 pounds. For someone my size, that barely scratched the surface, but to me it was everything. It was proof. Proof that change was possible. Proof that I was still here. That my body hadn't given up on me, even when my mind almost had. One morning I looked in the mirror and, for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. My face still carried the weight of my past, but now I could also see something else. Life. It was around this time that Amanda agreed to meet me for coffee. Not as a couple, not to talk about reconciliation, but as parents. I hadn't seen my daughter in over 4 months. My hands were trembling as I waited at the cafe, rehearsing every word I wanted to say. When they walked in, my heart stopped. My daughter, Emily, ran to me, arms wide, laughing like she used to when she was small. I couldn't help but cry. She didn't see the weight. She didn't see the failure. She just saw her dad. And that hug, that one hug, gave me more strength than all the therapy sessions and all the early morning walks combined. Amanda watched from a distance. Her face was guarded, but there was something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the tiniest flicker of hope. We talked. I apologized, not just for what I had become, but for shutting her out when she tried to love me. I told her I wasn't expecting forgiveness. I just needed her to know that I was finally doing something about it, that I wasn't going to disappear again. She nodded. We talked about visitation, about Emily's school, about the way she now liked to paint rainbows on everything. I promised I'd show up. Every time, no matter what. And I meant it. Leaving that cafe, I felt like a man walking back into the world after years in hiding. From that day on, I became intentional. Every choice mattered. I worked with a nutritionist, started keeping a journal, and joined a small men's group at the community center. Guys who didn't know how to talk about emotions but were trying anyway. It wasn't always pretty. I had setbacks. There were nights when the loneliness crept in like fog, and I found myself standing in front of the fridge, staring at food like it held the answers. But more often than not, I walked away. Not because I was strong, but because I was learning to be honest. One of the hardest things I had to admit was that my humor, my charm, all the jokes, I used them as armor. I had convinced myself that as long as people were laughing, they wouldn't see the truth. But they did. And worse, I saw it too. There was a night I'll never forget. I was invited to speak at a small recovery group about my journey. I almost said no. Who was I to inspire anyone? I still had over 200 pounds to lose. My life was still a mess in many ways. But Richard told me, you don't inspire people by being perfect. You inspire them by being real. So I stood in front of 12 strangers and told them everything. The weight, the depression, the loss, the shame. The day I cried in front of a receptionist, the walks, the mirror, the coffee with my daughter. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone stood up and said, "Thank you for saying what I've been too scared to admit." That night, I realized something powerful. I was no longer invisible. I was seen, not as a clown, not as a failure, but as a man who had fallen and was fighting to rise again. And that was the beginning of a new kind of freedom. The hardest part wasn't losing the weight. It was losing the identity I had clung to for so long. For years, being the big guy with the jokes was how people knew me. It was how I knew me. But as the pounds slowly melted away, and the sadness began to lift like a morning fog, I realized I didn't know who I was without that mask. Who was I, if not the self-deprecating giant at the back of the room? Therapy helped me navigate this strange terrain. Dr. Carter once asked, "Who would you be if no one else was watching?" That question haunted me for days. I didn't have an answer, so I began searching for it. Through trial, error, and countless journal pages, I signed up for a local art class. I didn't tell anyone, just showed up, nervous, holding a blank sketchpad like it was made of glass. I sat quietly in the corner, listening, learning. My lines were shaky, my proportions off, but there was peace in every pencil stroke. There, surrounded by quiet souls and messy charcoal fingers, I wasn't the big guy or the depressed guy. I was just Michael, a man learning how to create again. Each drawing became a reflection of my healing. I sketched trees with roots that twisted deep into the page, eyes filled with emotion, hands reaching for something unseen. I didn't know it then, but those drawings were letters from a version of myself I hadn't met yet. At the same time, my relationship with food began to shift. It stopped being a weapon. It became fuel, not just for my body, but for my life. I learned how to cook simple meals. I started meal prepping. I watched videos, made mistakes, burned rice a lot, and eventually found joy in making something from scratch. I remember the first time Emily came over for dinner after I moved into a new apartment. She walked in, wide-eyed, and said, "Daddy, it smells like a restaurant." I laughed and tried to hide the tears forming. We sat at the table, just the two of us, and shared a meal I had prepared with my own hands. No takeout, no delivery, no shame. That night, she asked if I could teach her how to make spaghetti the way I did. I said yes, of course, and we made a mess of the kitchen together, sauce on the floor, noodles stuck to the wall. But it was perfect. Moments like that don't show up on a scale. You can't measure them in pounds lost or inches dropped. But they matter. They are the real victories. Socially, things began to shift too. For a long time, I avoided gatherings. I was afraid of the stares, the whispers. But as I gained confidence, I started saying yes. I went to barbecues, birthday parties, even a community hike. Yes, a hike. It was short and I came in last, but I finished it. And when I reached the top of that tiny hill, I raised my hands and shouted, "I made it!" People clapped, not in mockery, but in solidarity. One man around my age walked over and said, "You've inspired me, man. I've been putting it off for years. But seeing you here, I'm out of excuses." That hit me hard, because for so long I thought my story was one of shame. But now it was becoming a story of hope, of redemption, of proof that it's never too late to begin again. But not everyone celebrated my progress. Some people from my past reached out with skepticism, old friends who only knew the version of me that cracked jokes between bites of pizza. Some didn't know how to talk to me anymore. Others tried to lure me back into old patterns. "Come on, just one burger. Night for old time's sake." It hurt. It made me question myself, but I reminded myself of something Dr. Carter once told me. When you grow, not everyone will grow with you. And that's okay. Growth is lonely sometimes, but loneliness is still better than pretending. I chose to keep moving, slowly, steadily, not toward a number, not toward perfection, but toward a life where I could finally breathe. A year after that morning, when I looked into the mirror and whispered, "I don't want to live like this anymore," I stood on a stage at a local health and wellness fair, holding a microphone in trembling hands. There were maybe 100 people in the room, some in folding chairs, some standing near the back, others watching from the hallway. All eyes on me, but I wasn't scared. I wasn't ashamed. I told them my story, not the polished version, not the before and after headline, but the messy, painful human story. The one that started with a man who used laughter as a shield, who lost his family, his career, his sense of self, and then, against all odds, found something worth fighting for again. I told them how I used to eat to escape, to punish, to forget. How I hid behind jokes because being invisible hurt less than being rejected. How I used to think asking for help was weakness, until I realized it was the bravest thing I'd ever done. And then, I told them what I'd gained, not just the weight. I gained mornings where I woke up with energy. Afternoons spent playing board games with Emily, evenings where silence didn't feel like a punishment. I gained friends who knew the real me. I gained pride, not in how I looked, but in who I was becoming. I looked out at that crowd, and I saw people wiping their eyes, nodding, whispering to each other, and in that moment I understood something deep in my bones. My pain had a purpose. It had led me to this moment, to connection, to healing, to service. After that talk, a man approached me. He was in his late 50s, heavy-set, eyes tired. He said, "Michael, I haven't left my house in weeks. My wife left last month. My daughter won't talk to me. But you gave me something today. You gave me hope." We hugged, two strangers. Two warriors in different stages of the same battle. That's when I knew this was no longer just my story. It belonged to every person who'd ever felt small in a big world, every person who'd laughed through tears, every person who thought they were beyond saving. Today I weigh 290 pounds, still a long way to go, yes, but also a long way from where I started. I'm not chasing a number anymore. I'm chasing peace, wholeness, purpose. I still go to therapy, I still journal, I still have tough days. Depression doesn't vanish. It lingers like a fog in the early morning, sometimes light, sometimes thick. But now I know how to walk through it. I don't run, I don't hide, I walk step by step through the shadows toward the light. Emily is now 10. She's smart, kind, and doesn't go a week without reminding me, "Daddy, I'm proud of you." We cook together every weekend. Her spaghetti sauce is better than mine now. And Amanda, we've rebuilt something too. Not a romantic relationship, but something deeper, mutual respect, co-parenting, and a quiet gratitude that we found our way back to honesty. Sometimes I speak at schools. Sometimes I just sit quietly in a coffee shop, sketching trees and letting the world pass by. Both feel like victory. To anyone reading this, listening to this, or walking their own dark road, I'll say what I wish someone had said to me. You're not broken. You're not beyond help. And you don't have to do it alone. I used to believe that if people saw the real me, they'd turn away. Now I know if they see the real me and stay, those are the people worth keeping. And as for me, I'm staying. I'm choosing life. Not the perfect one, but the real one. And that I've learned is more than enough.